China's National Bureau of Statistics released its 2024 Economic Performance Report, highlighting a fourth quarter GDP growth rate of 5.4%, surpassing market expectations of 5% to 5.2%. Combined with third quarter growth of 4.6% and a 5% increase in the first half of the year, China achieved its annual GDP growth target of 5%. For 2024, investment recorded growth rates of 3.2%, consumption of 3.5%, and exports of 5.86%. Exports emerge as the leading contributor to the GDP growth, while investment and consumption showed sluggish performance. With investment linked to employment and consumption tied to spending, the underperformance of these indicators has led to a lackluster public perception of economic conditions. Despite positive commentary on state media platforms, dissenting voices questioning the data's accuracy have surfaced on tightly controlled social media networks. Comments included, China's GDP figures originate from annual targets, not end-of-year calculations. It's just a number with no real feeling behind it. Even if they claim 10% growth, I couldn't refute it. We all knew when the target was set last year that it would be 5%. These figures are no longer reliable. How can GDP growth by 5% when most indicators are below 5%? Everyone knows the Statistics Bureau is just another propaganda arm. Economists and analysts have long questioned the reliability of China's economic data, particularly as the government seeks to counter concerns over a long-term slowdown. On January 22nd, Chinese economist Xing Wang posted a video on Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok, exposing local governments for falsifying GDP figures. The video was swiftly removed by the platform.
今天希望哥说一下 GDP.
In 2024, China's GDP growth exceeded 5%, but among the 5,300 publicly listed companies in the country, over 1,300 have already released annual performance forecasts, and 1,100 of them reported losses. Publicly listed companies contribute about half the country's GDP, yet many are experiencing significant performance declines or generating no returns at all. This starkly contrasts with the official stable GDP figures released by the government. This highlights a critical issue. The GDP generated by unlisted companies surpasses that of publicly listed ones. Local governments support what they claim to be outstanding companies, pushing them to go public, only to find that many of these listed firms are underperforming or even worthless. Essentially, this means that these regions fail to produce a single high-quality enterprise that can represent their image. Being listed often equates to being a poor performer. In other words, unlisted companies in 2024 generated significantly more GDP than listed companies, potentially double. As listed companies' GDP contributions declined, unlisted enterprises had to work twice as hard to fill the gap. This leads to a second issue. When listed companies can no longer engage in financial fraud, local governments shift the manipulation to unlisted firms. They blatantly falsify the financial data of these unlisted companies to ensure that the region's GDP figures do not decline. Real estate has traditionally been a pillar industry of our country's economy. However, following the collapse of major developer Evergrande in 2022, new home sales stalled and real estate companies face sharp declines in GDP contributions. Despite this, China still reported GDP growth during the period. So, which industry replaced real estate as a driver of economic growth? The answer is none. Yet our GDP figures still showed impressive growth. The question is, how were these economic statistics calculated?
Economist Gao Shangwen has publicly criticized official economic statistics on multiple occasions. On December 12, 2024, as the chief economist at China's Securities, Gao spoke at a forum co-hosted by the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington, D.C. and the Chinese think tank China Finance 40 Forum. He remarked, "We don't know the true rate of China's economic growth. My guess is that the average GDP growth over the past 2 to 3 years has been around 2%. Despite the official figures being close to 5%. Gao predicted future growth rate of 3 to 4% over the next 3 to 5 years, though he noted official figures would likely remain at 5%. Meanwhile, a report by Rhodium Group published on December 31st, 2024 estimated China's actual GDP growth for the year at just 2.4% to 2.8%. Chinese President Xi Jinping has instructed officials to maintain a positive economic outlook and suppress dissenting voices. Gao's WeChat account was reportedly shut down, and the Wall Street Journal reported on January 8 that Xi ordered an investigation into Gao's after his remarks angered the leadership. This response underscores the government's sensitivity to economic challenges under Xi's administration, which has been increasingly strained. In a separate incident, Fu Pen, chief economist at Northeast Securities, delivered a detailed 25,000-character speech during an internal HSBC event in Shanghai on November 24th. He argued that China's economic issues rooted in insufficient effective consumption represent a structural shift rather than a short-term problem. Fu suggested that redistributing benefits is necessary to resolve these challenges. Fu also criticized the prohibition against negative economic discourse, warning that suppressing truthful feedback could lead to systemic errors, including flawed policymaking. His speech, widely circulated online, was reportedly targeted by regulatory authorities, though Fu denied rumors of being summoned for questioning. The speech was removed from Chinese platforms but continued to be reshared. Observers note that China's manipulation of economic statistics serves to uphold the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party and Xi's administration. Economic deterioration could undermine public trust in the regime. Since 2023, Xi and Politburo Standing Committee member Cai Qi, who oversees propaganda, have emphasized the importance of promoting economic optimism. At a recent national propaganda ministers' meeting, Cai called for strengthened narrative control, particularly regarding economic messaging. Reports from business leaders indicate that local officials often pressure companies to overstate performance figures, framing such directives as mandatory government orders. Analysts argue this practice reflects a consistent approach by the CCP to manage perceptions of its governance. Former finance manager Fu Xiaoli, who worked at Shenzhen Pacific Shipping China Co. Limited, revealed that in a recent interview with foreign media how the Chinese government manipulates GDP data to maintain the illusion of economic growth. Fu stated that falsified GDP figures obscure real economic problems, particularly under the severe unemployment, and no longer reflect China's actual economic conditions. Earlier, the Levdio automobile founder Li Guoxin disclosed the false uplifting of GDP figures at the local level. In January 2023, Li accused Wang Xiao, the party secretary of Changle County, Weifeng City, of forcing Levdio to inflate its industrial and sales output figures. From March to December 2022, the company's actual revenue was 2.05 billion yuan, but under Wang's pressure, they reported a 6.73 billion yuan, adding 4.68 billion yuan to boost Wang's political achievements. Levdio initially resisted, but eventually complied after Wang cut off the company's loans, leading to its bankruptcy. Observers noted this case highlights the collusion between officials and businesses to falsify economic data for political gain and the intense competition within China's electric vehicle market. George Magnus, an assistant researcher at Oxford University's China Center and former UBS Group chief economist, described China's official economic data as fiction. He attributed this to the government's unrealistic GDP targets, which are consistently achieved, and its reliance on extensive stimulus measures despite supposedly robust growth. Taiwanese economist Wu Jialong shared similar views, stating that China's official economic data, including GDP growth rates, is unreliable. He said, "Friends from the mainland told me that to maintain GDP growth rates, a new tactic has been invented. Revising down last year's output figures, for instance, if the original growth rate was 4.5% or 5.2%, they lower it. Even if this year's actual growth is only 1% or 0.5%, it would appear to grow by 4% or 5% because last year's data was adjusted downwards. This is how the game is played. Each year, the previous year's data is revised downward, making it look like there's solid growth. The cycle then repeats, with this year's data being revised downward next year to sustain its illusion of growth. Wu remarked that analyzing such manipulated data is meaningless and that broader economic insights should guide the interpretations instead of relying on falsified figures. Some scholars argue that no one trusts Chinese official data, whether it's GDP figures or growth rates. They believe these are political numbers rather than economic indicators. China, with a population of over 1.4 billion and labor force of approximately 900 million, places employment as a top concern for citizens. On January 20th, the National Bureau of Statistics reported a 5.1% average urban unemployment rate in 2024, a 0.1 percentage point decrease from the previous year. The same data show that China's population continued to decline for the third consecutive year. In 2024, there were 9.54 million births, with a birth rate of 6.77%, and 10.93 million deaths, with a death rate of 7.76%. Income data has also been a focus of public discussion. In 2024, the national median disposable income was 34,707 yuan, a 5% increase from 2023, outpacing GDP growth. Despite minimal inflation reflected by a 0.2% rise in the Consumer Price Index for 2024, consumer spending remained weak. Retail sales grew by only 3.5% year-on-year, leading to widespread debates on how to encourage spending. Hong Hao, director of the China Chief Economist Forum and chief economist at Surrey Group, wrote on January 17th that consumption in essential goods and services appears weak. He noted that low consumption rates are not only due to slowing income growth or a high preference for saving, but also stems from a deeper structural issue, a lack of consumer confidence. This lack of confidence stems from three factors. One is the unstable societal expectations, such as concerns about housing, education, healthcare, and retirement, which increases the inclination to save. 2. Slowing income growth, especially for low and middle income groups, which constrains their spending power. And 3. Declining asset returns, particularly in real estate, which weakens the wealth effects and dampens consumption. Hong argued that boosting consumer confidence is essential to revitalizing the market. Young people, once considered a key driver of consumption, are now burdened by high housing costs and significant debt. Many have already spent their future income on mortgages and loans, leaving them without the financial capacity to consume. High unemployment and salary cuts have forced many young people to adopt extremely frugal lifestyles. Financial scholar C. Ling, currently based in Australia, noted that the lack of social and governmental security exacerbates the issue, making the government's goal of stimulating consumption unlikely to succeed. Even for China's first-tier cities, retail growth turned negative in June 2024. Beijing's retail sales growth dropped by 6.3%, Shanghai by 9.4%, Guangzhou by 9.6%, and Shenzhen by 2.5%. Data shows that in 2022, household final consumption accounted for only 37% of China's GDP. This means that the wealth generated by Chinese people in a year, they consumed just over 1/3, with the remaining 2/3 directed towards investments or exports. In contrast, household consumption as a share of GDP was 68% in the United States and 56% in Japan. The low share of wages in GDP, about 50% compared to 50% in developed countries, leaves most Chinese consumers without sufficient disposable income to drive domestic demand. The long-standing underperformance of consumption as a share of GDP indicates a broken economic cycle, with excess products and services leading to overcapacity and stagnating growth. Netizens argue that the government should prioritize enabling people to earn more money before expecting them to spend. High prices and poor quality products have also been cited as deterrents to consumption. Amidst China's economic struggles, Xi Jinping has not implemented necessary measures to repair the economy. Instead, he continues to rely on a top-down approach, adhering to the belief in the East rising, West declining narrative. A December 2024 Wall Street Journal report revealed that a consulting firm warned Chinese leaders of a potential deflationary spiral without urgent actions to revive growth. Xi reportedly dismissed these concerns, asking his advisors why deflation was bad, suggesting cheaper prices could be beneficial. This dismissive attitude has made deflation a taboo topic within China's policymaking circles. Advisors, fearing repercussions, refrain from explaining that deflation could lead to reduced demand, slower business activity, mass unemployment, and a series of economic and financial crises. Critics argue that dissenting voices are silenced, leaving only sycophants and timid politicians. The Wall Street Journal report also highlighted that Xi's decisions over the past decade have resulted in mounting debt, a collapsed real estate market, a looming deflationary spiral, slowing growth, a collapse in foreign investment, and record low consumer confidence.